What if tomorrow you woke up, poured your coffee, and found out that the language you think in was suddenly outlawed?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a genuinely terrifying premise.
Right. I mean, the language you dream in. Think about the voice in your head right now. Imagine being told that using it is an actual crime against the state.
Because, you aren't just losing a set of vocabulary words or grammar rules. I mean, you are losing the entire architecture of how you perceive and interpret the world around you.
Exactly. And that visceral, just total gut punch of a concept is the engine driving our deep dive today.
Yeah, it really is.
We are getting into a classic short story by Alphonse Daudet called The Last Lesson, and we're looking at this through the lens of a Class 12 textbook, actually.
Right, which is interesting because it pairs the original narrative with some incredibly sharp study materials.
Yeah, the study materials are fantastic. So our mission today is to unpack how this seemingly quaint story, about a kid running late for school, is actually this profound exploration of cultural erasure.
Linguistic identity, too.
Yes, and just the devastating, suffocating weight of the words too late.
Well, to truly grasp the stakes of what we're dealing with here, we really need to establish the historical crucible this story was forged in.
Right, give us the context.
So the backdrop provided in our text is the Franco-Prussian War, which spans from 1870 to 1871.
Okay.
And France has suffered a massive, crushing military defeat at the hands of Prussia, led by Bismarck.
And Prussia at this time was much bigger than just modern Germany.
Right, definitely.
Okay.
During this era, Prussia encompassed what we now recognize as Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria.
Wow, okay. That's a huge force.
Yeah. And as a direct consequence of this defeat, the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine have been surrendered over to Prussian control.
So they just changed hands completely.
Exactly. That transfer of sovereignty is the invisible earthquake happening beneath the feet of every single character we're going to discuss today.
But let me stop you right there, because that brings up my biggest initial hurdle with this text.
Oh. What do you mean?
Well, with this massive geopolitical earthquake happening, the story does not start in a war room.
Right.
It doesn't start with generals or politicians. It starts with the incredibly mundane panic of a student who hasn't done his homework.
Which is such a contrast.
It really is.
Yeah.
We meet our narrator, this young boy, Franz. He's starting for school very late, and he's completely dreading a scolding because his teacher, M. Hamel, is going to test the class on participles.
And France doesn't know a thing about participles.
Not the first thing. Instead of pondering the fate of his nation, this kid is literally thinking about running away to go hunting for birds' eggs.
Yeah, typical kid stuff.
Right. It's a warm day, the birds are chirping, and out behind the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers are drilling. Honestly. To me, it feels a bit like burying the lid.
How so?
Well, why frame a story about a massive national trauma through the eyes of a 12-year-old kid who just wants to slide on the Saar River?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm reading about the fall of a society, I want to see the decision makers, not a kid whining about grammar,
I hear that frustration, I do. But what's fascinating here is that this apparent mismatch is actually the core of Daudet's narrative strategy.
Really?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Choosing a child's perspective offers a level of emotional immediacy that a sweeping macro-historical overview simply cannot achieve.
Okay, I guess I can see that.
By contrasting the Prussian soldiers' drilling, which represents the macro-political reality of the occupation, with the rule for participles, which is the micro-reality of daily life, the author highlights the exact mechanism of how history sneaks up on ordinary people.
So you're saying the ignorance is the point.
Exactly. France embodies the initial carelessness that's kind of inherent in human nature. He is so hyper-focused on avoiding a minor scolding that the true existential tragedy of the day is completely lost on him.
Wow. Yeah, that hits hard.
As adult readers, or, advanced students, we recognize the shadow falling over the town. We see the soldiers. We know what the occupation means. But Franz only sees a sunny day that looks infinitely more tempting than a classroom.
It's a masterful use of tragic irony.
It really is.
And I suppose that mirrors how most of us actually experience historical events.
Oh, 100%.
Like, we are usually obsessing over a bad grade or a late commute while the world just shifts on its axis in the background. I mean, Franz even runs past the town hall bulletin board.
Right. bulletin board.
Yeah, he notes that for 2 years, that board has been the source of all their bad news lost battles, the draft, commanding officer orders.
All the heavy stuff.
Exactly. He sees a crowd reading it, and a blacksmith calls out to him like, "Don't go so fast, bub. You'll get to your school in plenty of time."
And Franz misinterprets that entirely.
Right. Franz actually thinks the guy is mocking him. He just puts his head down and sprints to the schoolhouse. He completely ignores all the warning signs.
And that sprint brings us to a major thematic shift in the story.
The shift indoors, right?
Yes. The narrative moves from the bustling, oblivious outside world into the physical, contained space of the classroom. Daudet uses sensory details here to signal that the fundamental rules of reality have irrevocably changed.
Okay, let's unpack this because the sensory shock really is palpable.
It's so well done.
The text establishes a baseline for us. Normally, the beginning of school is pure chaos, a great bustle that echoes out into the street.
Desks slamming, kids shouting.
Yeah, kids repeating lessons so loudly they have to cover their ears, the teacher's iron ruler rapping on the table. Franz was banking on that exact commotion to sneak into his seat unnoticed.
That was his whole plan.
Right. But when he arrives, it is as quiet as a Sunday morning. Daudet uses this brilliant psychological trick here.
Oh, looking through the window.
Yes. Franz looks through the window, sees his classmates sitting in dead silence, and watches M. Hamel pacing with that terrible iron ruler. Franz opens the door, expecting the wrath of God.
But that's not what happens.
Not at all. M. Hamel speaks incredibly kindly. He just says, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you."
That unnatural kindness is the first indicator of the paradigm shift. The mundane system of punishment and reward has been entirely suspended.
It's chilling, honestly.
And as Franz recovers from his initial terror, the visual shock sets in, further reinforcing that they have entered a liminal space.
The visual is striking. I mean, M. Hamel is dressed to the nines.
He really is.
He is wearing a beautiful green coat, a frilled shirt, and this little black silk-embroidered cap. The text explicitly notes he never wears these clothes except on inspection and prize days.
It's his absolute best attire.
Yeah. To me, dressing in your Sunday best on a random Tuesday morning is the visual equivalent of a siren going off. It demands attention.
It definitely does.
But even that isn't the biggest shock. The back benches of the classroom, the ones that are always empty, are filled with the adults of the village.
That's the real kicker.
Right. Old Hauser is there in his three-cornered hat, holding a thumbed-up old primer book. The former mayor is there, the former postmaster, and they all just look incredibly sad.
Well, think about the function of that space now. It is no longer a site of childhood discipline. It has been transformed into a makeshift temple of national mourning.
A temple of mourning. Wow.
Yeah. When M. Hamel mounts his chair, he delivers the news that explains the silence, the clothes, and the village elders.
The order from Berlin.
Exactly. The orders come down. Only German is to be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master arrives tomorrow. This is their last French lesson.
Franz calls those words a thunderclap.
It's a great description.
It really is. It's the realization of what was on that bulletin board. And the psychological pivot Franz undergoes in that single moment is violent.
He changes instantly.
The text says his books, which moments ago were a nuisance and too heavy to carry, suddenly became old friends that he couldn't give up.
It's that exact sinking feeling you get when, say, a computer hard drive crashes.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Suddenly, these mundane photos you haven't looked at in a decade become the most valuable things in the world to you simply because you are told you can never access them again.
Yes. His regret is just agonizing. He suddenly hates himself for seeking birds' eggs instead of learning his verbs.
And that regret is where Daudet extends the narrative beyond 19th century France and points it directly at you, the listener.
How do you mean?
Well, because Franz's procrastination is a universal human flaw. We all operate under the profound delusion that time is infinite.
We really do.
We put off the difficult work, the studying, the preservation of our culture, the conversations with our elders, always assuming there will be a tomorrow to handle it.
Yeah.
M. Hamel actually spells this out. He says, this is the great trouble with Alsace. She puts off learning till tomorrow.
And that explains the village elders in the back of the room. They aren't just there to observe.
No, not at all.
They are grappling with that exact same flaw. They are mourning their own procrastination.
Precisely. They are present because they regret not having gone to school more. It is a collective generational grief over taking their own culture for granted.
Wow.
They are also there to honor the master for his 40 years of faithful service, but fundamentally their presence signifies a profound remorse. When a nation is occupied, the failure isn't just military.
Right, it's cultural.
Exactly. It is the realization of all the quiet, daily ways a people failed to fortify their own identity when they had the chance.
That brings up a really uncomfortable realization during the lesson itself.
Oh, when Friends has to recite.
Yeah. When it's Franz's turn to recite the rule for the participle, he wants desperately to say it loud and clear without a mistake. He wants to redeem
He
himself.
wants that one last chance.
But he gets mixed up on the very first words and just stands there holding his desk, completely humiliated.
It's heartbreaking.
And M. Hamill doesn't yell at him. Instead, he starts distributing the blame. And he doesn't spare anyone.
He casts a wide net.
He really does. He blames the parents, saying they preferred to put kids to work on farms or in the mills for a few extra francs rather than ensuring their education.
Which was very common at the time.
Right. But even more radically, M. Hamill blames himself.
Yeah, that part is amazing.
He confesses that he often sent students to water his garden instead of teaching them, or he just gave them a holiday when he wanted to go fishing.
It is an astonishing moment of accountability from an authority figure. M. Hamill strips away the hierarchy of the classroom to acknowledge their shared complicity in their current vulnerability.
He puts himself on their level.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this confession acts as the foundation for the story's central philosophical argument,
Which is?
the mechanics of linguistic imperialism. After accepting his share of the blame, M. Hamill elevates the French language. He calls it the most beautiful, clear, and logical language in the world.
Right, he says they have to protect it.
He tells the class they must guard it among themselves and never forget it. Why? Because, he says, when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison.
So the occupiers aren't just taking the physical soil of Alsace and Lorraine.
No, it's much deeper than that.
That's the terrifying part. By banning the language, they are attempting a systematic erasure of the mental framework of the French people.
Exactly the point. Language is not merely a utility for exchanging information. It is the repository of a culture's memory, its humor, its familial bonds, its unique way of interpreting the universe.
It's everything.
By forcing German into the schools, the Prussian authority is attempting to rewire the next generation's brains, making them foreigners to their own ancestry. M. Hamill is shifting the act of learning grammar from a tedious academic chore into a vital act of cultural survival.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Daudet grounds this massive, heavy concept of imperialism in a very specific, brilliant observation from Franz.
Oh, the pigeons?
Yes. During the writing lesson, Franz hears some pigeons cooing very low on the roof of the schoolhouse. And the boy thinks to himself, will they make them sing in German? Even the pigeons.
It's such a striking image.
To me, this is the most devastating line in the text because it exposes the sheer absurdity of the occupation.
How do you mean? What is the specific absurdity the child is noticing there?
Well, it's the arrogance of trying to legislate nature. I look at it like a government passing a law to change the direction the wind blows.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
The conquerors have the physical force to change the signs on the buildings. They can dictate the curriculum. They can swap out the teacher. But they are trying to force a completely foreign, unnatural identity onto a people, down to their very core.
Well, that is impossible.
Exactly. Franz looks at those pigeons creatures, operating purely on natural instinct, and his childlike logic strips away the political grandstanding. You can't force a pigeon to coo in German, just like you can't truly force a French soul to stop being French, even if you confiscate their dictionary.
Right.
It highlights the ultimate overreach of the empire.
That is a very sharp analogy. It draws a stark line between physical dominion and spiritual or cultural dominion.
Yeah.
The oppressor wields absolute physical power, but they are powerless against the natural order of identity. And the classroom, in this final hour, transforms into a space of pure, non-verbal defiance against that unnatural imposition.
It's a quiet rebellion.
Yes, which brings us to the climax of the narrative, where the focus shifts to the intense dignity of the final lesson. M. Howell reads a grammar lesson, and Franz is astounded by how clearly he understands it.
It just clicks for him suddenly.
He realizes he had never listened so carefully, and M. Hamill had never explained with so much patience. It is as if the teacher is trying to pour his entire life's knowledge into their minds in a single stroke.
And the writing lesson that follows is incredibly cinematic. Daudet paints a picture of intense, focused resistance.
The little flags.
Yeah. Hamhamel brings new copies for the students, written in a beautiful round hand. France, Alsace, France, Alsace. Franz observes that these papers look like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rods at the top of their desks.
The atmosphere there must be so thick.
Unbelievably thick. The only sound in the entire room is the scratching of pens over paper. At one point, some beetles fly into the room.
And kids usually go crazy over bugs.
Exactly. Normally, a classroom of kids would lose their minds over bugs flying in, but nobody breaks focus. Not even the littlest kids who are just tracing their fishhooks, the basic strokes of writing.
They just keep working.
They work right on as if tracing those literal shapes was an act of patriotism. The very friction of ink on paper becomes their rebellion.
This raises an important question, though. How do people maintain their humanity when the institutions that define their society are being dismantled in real time?
Right. How do you act in that moment?
Daudet's answer is profound, quiet dignity. Whenever Franz looks up, he sees M. Hamel sitting completely motionless, gazing at the room as if trying to fix every detail in his mind.
Just taking it all in.
Think of the psychological toll. He has been in that exact place for 40 years. The desks are worn smooth by decades of students. The walnut trees in the garden he planted have grown tall.
And his sister is packing upstairs.
Yes. Right above their heads, you can hear his sister packing their trunks because they are being forced to leave the country the next day. The grief is suffocating. Yet M. Hamel possesses the courage to hear every single lesson to the very last minute.
It's incredible discipline.
After writing, they have a history lesson, and then the babies chant their syllables. In the back, old Hauser has put on his spectacles, holding his primer in both hands, spelling the letters with them.
Hauser's crying during this, right?
He is. His voice is trembling so much with emotion that Franz says it was funny to hear him, that they all wanted to laugh and cry at the same time.
I love that detail because it captures the overwhelming, messy reality of human grief. There is no Hollywood melodrama, just this ticking clock and people trying to hold themselves together.
And then the climax arrives.
Right? The church clock strikes 12. Then the Angelus rings. That's the traditional Catholic bell calling the village to prayer, a symbol of their ancient, rhythmic, peaceful way of life.
But then comes the interruption.
Exactly. In the exact same breath, that holy bell is drowned out by the harsh sound of the Prussian trumpets returning from drill right under the school windows. The outside world violently crashes back into their sanctuary.
The micro and the macro finally collide. M. Hamel stands up, looking incredibly pale. He tries to speak, saying, "My friends, But he physically cannot go on. The emotion just chokes him.
So what does this all mean? He turns to the blackboard, takes a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he writes as large as he can, "Vive la France! Long live France!"
The final message.
Then he stops, leans his head against the wall, and without a single word makes a gesture to them with his hand. "School is dismissed, you may go."
Just a gesture.
Now, I want to unpack that ending. When I first read that wordless dismissal, I initially interpreted it as total defeat. The occupier won. The teacher has literally been silenced.
I can see why you think that.
But considering he just carved Vive la France into the board with all his strength, is that silence actually a final act of defiance?
It is the ultimate concession to the physical reality of the moment, paired with an unbreakable spirit. Words have literally failed Emil Hamel. His voice is choked with the grief of losing his country and his life's work.
The trumpets won the audio battle.
Exactly. The Prussian trumpets have drowned out the spoken French lesson. Yet, by writing Vive la France as large as he can, he leaves them with a visual monument.
A monument. I like that.
His silence at the very end isn't a surrender. It is a dignified acknowledgement that the formal lesson is over. But language, and the identity it carries, must now endure independently in their minds.
So it lives on with them.
Yes. To synthesize the core message of the last lesson, when an occupying force attempts to erase linguistic identity, they are trying to lock the doors on a people's history and their future.
And the study materials provided with this text make it very clear that this isn't just an isolated incident from 1870s France.
No, it happens everywhere.
The textbook directly prompts the reader to think about linguistic minorities navigating modern states today. It asks you to consider groups like Punjabis in Bangalore, Tamilians in Mumbai, Kannadigas in Delhi, or Gujaratis in Kolkata.
Which brings it right into the present.
Exactly. How do linguistic minorities keep their language alive in a rapidly shifting, globalized environment? Now, obviously, we're not taking any political sides here. We're just looking at the questions the text is raising.
Of course. It's about the ideas in the source material.
Right. The text forces you to look around your own country and recognize that the struggle to maintain linguistic identity is an ongoing, everyday effort. It also introduces the complex concept of linguistic chauvinism, posing the difficult question of when a protective pride in one's own language crosses the line into the active suppression of someone else's.
The study guide brilliantly moves the discussion from a historical emotional tragedy to a practical modern civic responsibility.
It really does.
It challenges the listener to examine the constitutional guarantees that protect linguistic minorities. It asks you to recognize that the slow erosion of a language, whether through blunt political force or gradual cultural assimilation, represents the permanent loss of a unique lens through which to view humanity.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. We spend so much time thinking about the overt threats to our culture. The armies, the borders, the dramatic decrees like the one from Berlin.
The obvious things.
Yes, but the landscape of cultural erasure has evolved. What if the occupying force today isn't an army in your town square, but an algorithm in your pocket?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy thought.
We live in a digital age where the vast majority of our media, our code, and our global commerce is dominated by just a handful of languages.
Very true.
If an occupying force doesn't need to physically enter your classroom anymore, but can simply dictate the language of the content you consume, the apps you use, and the platforms where you socialize, how quickly could a culture be slowly, willingly erased today without a single trumpet ever sounding?
Just fading away in the background.
Exactly. If the language you dream in was quietly slipping away into the digital ether, what would you suddenly desperately wish you had paid attention to today?